Let's talk about the recent downgrade of US debt. I think the question that a lot of individuals have is, why is it important, and what exactly does it mean?
Yeah, good questions. It is important, right? It's real. Fitch downgraded the U.S. credit from AAA to AA plus. It's one notch, and they provided a laundry list of rationale. We copied here some of the most important points, the heavier weight, really, behind their downgrade, and really the rationale was an erosion of governance, and they just go on to say over the past 20 years, it seems like politics in the US has gotten significantly worse, very polarizing on both ends. And, um, they provide detailed rationale that they see limited progress in Washington, and they expect the same for the next, handful of years. Number one. Number two, rising general government deficits. So we continue to spend significantly more than we make. Number three, government debt has risen substantially, and they expect it to continue to rise, maybe at a slower pace, but more so driven by compounding higher interest rates on that debt,
Mhm.
um, and a lack of discussion around how to stop that from happening. And that is absolutely true. And then medium-term fiscal challenges unaddressed. So that is a cute way for them to say that Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, the entitlement programs, are growing like weeds, and soon they will really gobble up all of the tax receipts, all the income that this country has, if something isn't done about them. And ultimately, all of this says, if you do nothing now, we won't be able to do anything in the future. And that is true. That's just
Sure.
how it works. So, do I love the fact that Fitch downgraded the US credit rating? No. Can I see why? Clearly. And you know, I think everybody can agree with most of this, some of this. It's unfortunate that Fitch downgraded the US, but it is what it is. What I should mention, there are three credit rating agencies for sovereign debt, and for corporate debt and for municipal debt. There's the big three, right? It's Moody's, which is partially owned by Warren Buffett through Berkshire Hathaway.
Mhm.
There's Standard and Poor's, and then there's Fitch, and the largest being Moody's, the second largest being S&P, and the third largest being Fitch. S&P downgraded the U.S. credit rating from AAA to AA plus 12 years ago. So you now have two of the three rating agencies who have downgraded the U.S. credit from AAA down to AA plus. So, Fitch just jumped on board. The commentary from Moody's is sort of the opposite. They're the one holdout saying, because we are the world's reserve currency and we are, in essence, the world's piggy bank, they don't see the need to downgrade, only if they thought we were in a position where we couldn't pay our debts. And we certainly can pay our debts. This is more of a warning shot to
Mhm.
Washington. That's what I view this as. And
Okay.
it's accurate. I think if you're in office while this happens, you are going to deny and blame and point the finger on anybody else, and that's exactly what's happening now.
Yeah.
But it did happen, and it's real. So, ultimately, the what people want to know is, how does it impact the capital markets? How does it impact me? And
Right.
generally speaking, I'll say for now, there's absolutely no impact, which I can prove. And hopefully, again, this acts as just a warning shot to Washington to start to plan for this stuff.
Right. Yeah. The
So
markets didn't seem to move at all.
they didn't.
Okay. Great. And I think for those that we realize this is a very boring slide, but for those that maybe are a little bit more visual, um, you know, shout out to Kate on our team for putting this together. We usually borrow slides from others, but this was created by our own team, and I think it's a fantastic visual.
Yeah, so Kate Hartman, our very own Kate Hartman in the office, drew this picture as we were talking about our talking points for this meeting. And I think she pulled it off perfectly.
Yeah.
You have this long road that has caution flags on it, debt, China, Medicare, Medicaid, geopolitics, lobbyists, unions, Social Security, bags of money. You have this gigantic can that is the USA
Mhm.
with dents all over it and a kick me sign on it. And you really have had this can that's been kicked down the road for so long by so many on both sides. We're nearing sort of the end of the road. You got to do something now.
Yeah.
Up in the wings there, we have dollar bills with wings. We were talking about millions not too long ago. Billions entered the conversation about 10 years ago. And all of a sudden, 2 years ago, we're talking in trillions. Well, guess what? After trillions comes quadrillions.
Holy cow.
And coming soon. Give
Yeah.
us another decade, we'll be talking about quadrillions.
Yeah.
That's what happens when things compound.
Yeah.
Numbers get larger, and you start talking in these odd terms, and it is on the horizon. So you'll see this interesting big can that is being kicked further and further towards the end of the road. And unfortunately, on the other side of that, if we don't get our fiscal affairs in order in the United
Mhm.
States, you know, our independence turns into dependency, where we have to depend on others for everything.
Right.
You think about default, and not to say that this is going to happen, but on the other side of dependency and default is some type of economic depression. So um, we don't think that's happening anytime soon,
No.
and it shouldn't happen. But the longer we kick this giant can down the road, the closer we get to that stuff.
Yeah.
So
And to your point, hopefully this downgrade is a warning. And there's plenty of time. And I think to take it just one step further, I think this is a great visual on what you were talking about earlier with the three credit ratings. You've got Fitch on the left, S&P in the middle, and Moody's on the right, relative to other nations around the world.
that's right. So what you see here is there's a AAA status across the board amongst the three rating agencies for, Australia, Denmark, Germany, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland. Those are the remaining all AAA rated by every agency countries. Canada has two out of the three. US has one out of the three. Moody's two that have downgraded. Again, S&P downgraded us back in August of 2011, and we had Fitch downgrade us August 1st of this year. So last week.
Yep.
Um,
And I think also there's a nice visual on the right-hand side to point out that the downgrade was one notch, right?
it was one notch. Yeah, it's again, if we weren't the world's reserve currency, if we're not the piggy bank of the world, it becomes a slightly bigger issue.
Mm-hmm.
And that issue is the cost of financing, the cost of our debt rises, our currency will fluctuate. We're not seeing that because of our status. So, in essence, what I'm saying here is our status of who we are, the leaders of the free world with the world's reserve currency, being the world's piggy bank,
Right.
is keeping us in a place where we're not impacted by this. All these other countries, if this happened to them, they would feel it more than us, if
Sure.
that makes sense.
Yep. We're
So
still one of the best houses in a bad neighborhood.
absolutely. Yeah. I should mention just a few little things that maybe a few listeners would have questions about. Intricate details. When the country's debt gets downgraded from AAA, any new debt issued by companies and municipalities in this country
Mm-hmm.
cannot be higher rated than the country's debt.
Right.
So if you are
Great
Johnson and
point.
Johnson, right? Any new debt that you issue, let's say you were AAA rated, the corporate debt rating for any company cannot be higher than the country's rating.
Per that
So
rating agency, correct?
what's that? Per agency, correct. So now companies cannot issue bonds and get the same credit rating. New debt.
Yeah.
Their old debt remains the way it rated the way it is, but new debt is impacted by this, and municipalities are also slightly impacted by this because oftentimes the backup funding vehicle they have for their municipal bonds are U.S. government uh, securities, treasuries that just
Yeah.
got slightly derated
Mm.
or downgraded. So there's a you know
Yeah.
some nuance there.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Thank you.
So
And I think just one last slide that addresses this is talking about spending and the trends going forward.
yeah, it's this isn't a political statement. It's just math. We the country spends way too much money, and Congress, which is supposed to be checks and balances, they need to do a better job of preventing us from spending way too much money.
Mhm.
Uh, Look, it's no secret that spending gets you votes. Saying yes to everything gets you votes. But in our personal lives and in business, if you say yes to everything and everyone, you'll run out of money pretty quickly and you get into trouble pretty quickly. So that's sort of what's happening with the government.
Sure.
Uh, there are too many yeses and not enough nos, which means maybe some of the hardest calls aren't being made. Maybe some of the hardest things to tackle, the most difficult things to tackle in Washington aren't being tackled, and someone's going to have to do it, and someone's going to have to start talking about this stuff soon. But we just spend way too much money on top of our debt now being not only higher but more expensive.
Mhm.
So higher interest rates not only impacts mortgage rates, car loans, corporate financing, it also impacts the government, especially when you have a boatload of debt.
Yep.
So you can see on this chart here that entitlement spending has gone through the roof and continues to go through the roof. But because of that, non-defense discretionary spending has to go down. Well, if entitlement spending keeps growing, there will be no discretionary spending, period.
Yep.
That'll be zero eventually. Number one. Number two, there is this crossover, the very unpleasant crossover, where you compare all of the revenue that the government gets to entitlements, other mandatory expenses, and interest. And pretty soon, a permanent crossover will come where all of the money that the country receives goes to pay entitlement programs, mandatory expenses, and interest.
That's
That's
it.
that's coming soon. That's
Yeah.
the red dot on the screen there, and you can see that's sort of projected for sometime before 2030.
Right.
So the folks in Washington need to move very quickly to figure something out,
Yeah.
and they need to start talking about entitlement reform.
Yeah.
They have to.
Absolutely.
They have
Yeah.
to.
Changes need to be made, and it is interesting despite all this. And thank you for going through this downgrade. Thank you, Bob, for your time, and we thank everyone for their time and listening today. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to any of us here at Principal Wealth Partners.
Absolutely. Thanks, Julina.